Ouagadougou stirred awake beneath a soft, dust-rose dawn when Captain-turned-President Ibrahim Traoré chose his favorite ritual, walking alone, without escort, through the heart of the capital. The motorcade waited idling behind the palace gates, but he waved it off, craving the unfiltered pulse of his people. Vendors were just unlatching wooden shutters, a cobbler hammered half-sleepy nails into worn sandals, children traced hopscotch grids in red laterite. Crossing the arcaded plaza of Independence, Traoré slowed. Under the spreading crown of a flamboyant tree, an elderly man sat on a bench improvised from 2 fruit crates. His clothes, once café-colored, now bleached by Sahelian sun, hung loosely from narrow shoulders. Yet his posture was erect, eyes intent on every brittle page of a frayed paperback whose cover had long since faded. The man seemed an island of calm amid the honking taxis and clattering pushcarts. Something tugged at Traoré's memory. The tilt of the head, the deliberate turn of each page as though weighing ideas rather than ink. He edged closer, heart picking up an unfamiliar rhythm. When the reader glanced up, light caught a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles repaired with string. Recognition struck like dry-season thunder. "Professor Adama?" Traoré whispered, voice unsteady. The old man blinked, surprise flooding weather-lined features, then attempted to rise. His knees quivered, book nearly tumbling. Traoré bridged the distance in 2 strides, steadying him with soldier's hands now trembling like a child's. Memories surged, chalk dust spiraling in afternoon sun, a young cadet debating Kant versus Sankara, the same gentle baritone urging students to question power, even when you hold it. In that instant, titles dissolved. There stood not a president and a vagrant, but a former pupil facing the mentor who had first taught him that dignity begins where fear ends. "Don't try to stand, sir," Traoré urged, easing Professor Adama back onto the crate bench. Traffic kept rushing by, unaware that history had paused beneath the tree. The president crouched so their eyes were level. Adama smiled with the shy guilt of someone caught unprepared. "Mr. President, please," Traoré cut in, shaking his head. "Out here I'm still Ibrahim, the student who never mastered your Socratic essays." A fleeting laugh softened the professor's lined face, then faded beneath reality's weight. "How long have you been here?" the younger man asked. Adama's fingers worried the book's dog-eared corner. "Since the bank reclaimed my house 6 months ago. My pension, 23,000 CFA a month, barely covers millet, let alone medicine. I tutored when my lungs allowed, but students prefer online lessons now." He gestured around as though the cracked pavement were classroom walls. "Out here the tuition is wind and noise." Each sentence struck Traoré harder than the last. The republic he was trying to remake had already failed one of its brightest lights. He remembered Adama's lectures about Ubuntu, that a community is judged by how it treats the least defended. Yet here sat the teacher, undefended. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Traoré murmured. Adama's smile returned, sadder this time. "Leaders carry heavier burdens than an old man's rent. Besides, I still have books, they are roofs that never leak." A vendor approached, offering mango slices for 50 francs. Traoré pressed a 10,000-franc note into the man's hand, took the fruit and gave it to Adama whose hands trembled accepting the gift. Juice dripped down age-spotted wrists, glinting like liquid gold in the morning light. The president inhaled, made a decision. "You taught me that dignity cannot survive charity, it demands justice. Walk with me, Professor. Let us begin correcting an injustice, starting with yours." He extended an arm. The older man hesitated, then placed frail fingers onto a sleeve stitched with presidential insignia, finding it steady, familiar. They set off toward the avenue where an unmarked SUV idled. Bystanders stared, phones half-raised, puzzled to see the nation's head of state escorting a shabby elder as though accompanying royalty. Traoré ignored the whispers, in his mind every step echoed Adama's classroom refrain, "En société en avance que lorsqu'elle élève son maître plotot que son marchand." A society moves forward only when it uplifts its teacher before its traitor. The presidential SUV halted before the modest Kaluba branch of the National Savings Bank, far from the gleaming flagship downtown. Traoré preferred it for personal errands, anonymity was easier here. Nonetheless, as soon as he stepped inside with Adama, the marble foyer hushed. Customers recognized the commander-in-chief, cameras whispered awake. Manager Suten Sankara hurried from his glass office, suit immaculate. "Mr. President, this is an honor. How may we serve?" Traoré gestured to Adama, whose threadbare coat contrasted cruelly with polished floors. "This is Professor Amadou Adama, the man who taught half this city to think. He and every retired teacher deserve more than gratitude, they deserve security." He placed his identity card and a check booklet on the counter. "Open a new national fund, call it the Legacy Educators account. I'll seed it with today's presidential salary and bonuses. The Treasury will match within 48 hours. Sankara's composure faltered. "Sir, establishing a nationwide product involves actuarial, begin the paperwork," Traoré said quietly but firmly. Teachers waited decades, bureaucracy can sprint for once. As clerks fetched forms, Adama sank onto a sofa. "Ibrahim, this is too much." "Too little," Traoré corrected. "I'm merely returning interest on the knowledge you loaned me." Word spread fast. A teller's discreet live stream hit social media. By the time the first form was stamped, #Dignitapornispravs trended region-wide. Comments poured, "My maths teacher deserves this." "Nurse is next." Sankara returned with provisional documents. Traoré signed, then handed the pen to Adama. "Your signature inaugurates the fund." The professor's hand shook, ink blotted the page like a teardrop. Applause erupted from waiting customers. Some wiped eyes, others raised phones higher. In that clatter of claps and notifications, something intangible shifted. The bank felt less a vault for money, more a forge for moral currency. Before departing, Traoré addressed the lobby. "Our nation cannot stand tall if those who built its backbone kneel in poverty. Today is one corrective stroke, many more shall follow." Outside, sunlight blasted the pavement, but inside the SUV Adama felt warm for the first time in months, wrapped not in charity, but in the promise of institutional respect. The clip lasted 42 seconds. President Traoré in fatigues beside a frail elder in tattered khaki, signing forms under the neon glow of teller window 4. By noon it had crossed 10 million views across TikTok clones and WhatsApp chains from Dakar to Dar es Salaam. The algorithm loved the juxtaposition, power kneeling to wisdom, and poured it into countless feeds. In Ouagadougou, high schoolers broke lunch queues to replay the moment. University forums launched impromptu polls, should other professions have legacy funds? Street artists aerosol painted murals of Adama reading beneath a baobab while a young Traoré listens, soldier's beret in hand. State TV, often criticized for state broadcasts, pivoted. The evening news opened not with commodity prices but with a split screen, left, the viral clip, right, an anchor interviewing a panel of retired educators. One teacher recalled grading Traoré's essays. He argued that a nation's true GDP is general dignity of people. The line became meme fodder before the segment ended. Opposition politicians initially sniffed populist theater. Yet when a radio host invited them to discuss pension reform, callers flooded lines praising the initiative. An opposition deputy conceded on air, "If populism means honoring teachers, perhaps we need more of it." International outlets chimed in. The BBC's West Africa Bureau titled its piece, "Banking on Respect," while Al Jazeera contrasted Burkina Faso's new fund with neighboring states' unpaid teacher salaries. French media walked cautiously. Le Monde ran a column, "Traoré's symbolism masks economic realities," only to face backlash from African diaspora readers who asked why symbolism had been acceptable when Europe erected statues but suspect when Africa credited teachers. Inside the presidency, advisors tracked sentiment graphs spiking greener than the rainy season millet. Yet Traoré cautioned, a moment of applause can't substitute systemic change. He tasked the Ministry of Finance with drafting complementary tax exemptions for retired educators and ordered Health to add geriatric outreach units to its next budget. Meanwhile, in the cramped staff room of Lycée Yanenga, current teachers passed a manila envelope, collecting voluntary contributions for the new fund. By Friday they deposited $480, an emblem of community skin in the game. Corporate entities noticed. A mobile money giant pledged to waive transfer fees for all payouts from the legacy educators account. A local brewery promised 2% of July profits. Cynics muttered about marketing stunts, but the capital infusion was real. Resistance surfaced, too. Senior bureaucrats fretted about precedent: if teachers get supplements, nurses will demand the same. The finance minister replied dryly, perhaps that is justice knocking. Still, the macroeconomists warned of fiscal strain. Traoré scheduled a Saturday workshop with WTO analysts to explore syntax reallocations and dormant mineral royalties as funding streams. For Professor Adama, the whirlwind felt surreal. Volunteers whisked him to a clinic for tests, a barber trimmed months of unkempt beard, tailors fitted him with a modest boubou sewn from Faso Dan Fani cloth. All the while, he asked only to keep the weather-stained book that had shielded him from indifference. Traoré had that very copy rebound in goat leather, its pages cleaned but annotations preserved, marginalia about Aristotle sharing space with lines from Burigo Diop. On Sunday morning, church congregations and mosque assemblies alike prayed for those who plant knowledge. Sermons linked scripture to pedagogy, quoting hadith and proverbs exalting teachers. The moral narrative had transcended politics, it was now spiritual currency. By week's end, the Parliament's Education Committee scheduled an emergency session to debate nationwide pension reform. Cameras awaited fireworks, but a rare consensus emerged. The footage of a president stooping beside a destitute mentor had jarred lawmakers into common purpose more effectively than any lobby. Yet Traoré remained clear-eyed. In a closed briefing he told aides, popularity is fickle. Institutional memory is steel. We have lit the fire, now we must smelt policy. The virality had achieved its role, igniting conscience. The heavier forge work was only beginning. The initial ripple caused by Ibrahim Traoré's personal gesture towards his former teacher quickly spread beyond the confines of Ouagadougou. The moment captured at the bank, when the president, accompanied by Professor Adama, signed the documents to establish a national fund for retired teachers, became an instant social media phenomenon. It wasn't just a poignant moment between a leader and his teacher. It represented a symbolic turning point for the country. The viral video quickly gained traction across Burkina Faso and beyond, sparking a nationwide conversation about the value of educators and the urgent need to address systemic inequalities within the nation. As the hashtag Dignity for Teachers gained momentum, it wasn't long before the ripple effect reached the international stage. The images of a sitting president tenderly supporting an elderly educator, whose life had been ravaged by the system he had once dedicated himself to, struck a chord with audiences far beyond Burkina Faso. Within days, global media outlets, including the BBC and Al Jazeera, began covering the story. The narrative that Traoré had humanized his leadership by focusing on the dignity of his people, particularly the unsung heroes who had built the country, garnered praise. The conversation, however, was not without its critics. Some Western media outlets, while acknowledging the positive message behind Traoré's actions, cautioned that such symbolic gestures could not replace concrete structural reforms. Analysts raised concerns about the long-term sustainability of the initiative, given Burkina Faso's still fragile economy and dependency on foreign aid. Traoré, however, understood the nature of the game. He had dealt with these criticisms before, having grown up under the shadow of foreign influence in the country. His next move was always calculated, and he knew that symbolism alone would not bring about lasting change. This act was just one step in a broader, far-reaching agenda. Internally, the impact of this gesture was profound. In a country that had long suffered from political instability and economic stagnation, Traoré's leadership began to crystallize into something that the people could rally behind. Educators, nurses, farmers, and workers from every corner of the nation, once marginalized and forgotten, now saw hope in the promises of reform. Burkinabe citizens who had once felt the sting of political indifference now felt as though their voices could be heard. There was a collective awakening, an emerging sense that the country's future could be different, that it could be built not on the whims of foreign powers or entrenched elites, but on the principles of justice, dignity, and self-reliance. It was only a matter of time before Traoré took the next logical step. With the financial infrastructure of the legacy educators account set up, the question was no longer whether retired teachers would receive support, but how the initiative could be expanded to help other sectors of society that had been similarly neglected. The government, recognizing the growing public pressure, quickly moved to implement a wider-reaching initiative aimed at uplifting not just educators but other essential workers. Those who had built the nation with their hands and hearts but had been left behind by the system. At a meeting in the presidential palace, Traoré outlined the next phase of his plan to his cabinet. "This isn't just about teachers," he told them. "It's about our farmers, our nurses, our factory workers, the people who truly make Burkina Faso what it is. They've built this country, and now we're going to ensure they get the recognition and the support they deserve." The room was quiet, and his words hung heavily in the air. The promise was bold, but it was also realistic. The first steps had already been taken, now it was time to expand the vision. The cabinet approved the Appreciation of Unsung Heroes program, a national initiative designed to provide financial support, healthcare, and social services to retired workers in critical sectors. The program's core principle was simple: to honor those who had contributed to the country's development by ensuring that they could live out their final years with dignity. Local and international organizations were brought in to partner with the government in providing healthcare to the elderly, with mobile health units being deployed to remote areas. Pensions for retirees were recalculated, and for the first time in decades, the country's most vulnerable citizens were given a chance to live without the fear of poverty. News of the program's launch quickly spread. Citizens from all walks of life began to share their stories of how they had been impacted by the neglect of past administrations. Teachers spoke of their struggles to survive on insufficient pensions, farmers discussed the challenges of working the land with little government support, nurses and factory workers told stories of overwork and underappreciation. Through social media, citizens shared their excitement, using hashtags like #DignityForAll and #UnsungHeroes, to rally behind the initiative and spread the message that change was not only possible but already happening. Traoré, however, knew that he could not let the excitement of the moment cloud the larger challenge ahead. The program was only the beginning. While it had made a tangible impact, he understood that the key to true systemic change lay in rethinking the way the country's resources were managed. Foreign aid was no longer a reliable or desirable option, and the country's dependence on it had only perpetuated its cycle of poverty. Burkina Faso had abundant natural resources, but they had often been exploited by foreign corporations with little regard for the people or the environment. Traoré began to turn his attention to the country's vast mineral wealth, particularly its gold and lithium resources, and to rethinking how these resources could be used to benefit the people directly. As Traoré's reforms continued to take shape, the country began to see a shift in both its economic and political landscape. The legacy educators account became a powerful symbol of Traoré's commitment to addressing social inequalities, and the Appreciation of Unsung Heroes program became a rallying cry for all those who had been forgotten by previous administrations. The president's popularity soared, and his vision for a more just and self-reliant Burkina Faso began to take hold, not just among the country's citizens, but also among its regional allies. In a press statement, Traoré summed up his thoughts: "We are not just changing Burkina Faso, we are changing the narrative of Africa. We are showing the world that true leadership is not about power. It's about lifting up those who have been left behind, and ensuring that every citizen has the chance to live with dignity." The seeds of reform had been planted, and they were beginning to sprout. But Traoré knew that the path ahead was long, and the road would not always be easy. Nonetheless, he remained resolute. His vision for Burkina Faso was not one of quick fixes or fleeting moments of glory. It was about long-term transformation, a transformation that would uplift every Burkinabe, no matter their background, no matter their occupation. And as the initiative continued to unfold, one thing was clear: Ibrahim Traoré's leadership was no longer defined by a single act of kindness but by a commitment to governance that put the needs of the people first. Through his dedication and the collective efforts of the Burkinabe people, a new chapter for Burkina Faso had begun. As news of Ibrahim Traoré's gesture spreads, both domestically and abroad, the public's perception of his presidency shifts dramatically. His initiative to create a national fund for retired teachers, born from a deeply personal encounter, becomes an instant symbol of leadership that values compassion over political gamesmanship. However, Traoré's efforts do not go unnoticed by the global powers that have long influenced Burkina Faso's policies. The reaction from international media is swift and varied. Western outlets, which have grown accustomed to framing African leaders within the confines of economic struggle or authoritarianism, struggle to categorize Traoré's actions. In response, several media organizations begin to frame him as a populist figure who is capitalizing on sentiment rather than addressing the country's long-standing structural issues. Articles such as "Populism in Burkina Faso, Traoré's dignity-driven politics" surface, while critics in Brussels and Washington remain skeptical, suggesting that such symbolic acts cannot resolve the underlying issues of poverty, infrastructure, and development. Despite the pushback, Traoré remains resolute. Instead of retreating from his commitment, he doubles down, using the moment as a platform to introduce broader reforms that tackle the country's economic and social inequalities. His government begins to scrutinize foreign investments and their role in the exploitation of national resources, particularly gold and lithium. Foreign companies that have operated with little oversight suddenly find themselves faced with stringent regulations and demands for fairer profit-sharing agreements. Simultaneously, an economic siege begins to take shape. Foreign entities, unable to directly target Traoré's rising popularity, shift tactics, attempting to leverage Burkina Faso's reliance on imports and foreign aid. Food shortages, combined with the increased international sanctions, push the country to the brink. However, Traoré's leadership takes on a new form as he begins to find creative solutions to navigate the crisis. He moves away from traditional reliance on foreign aid, instead negotiating trade deals with non-Western allies such as China, Indonesia, and the UAE. In these negotiations, he leverages Burkina Faso's untapped mineral resources as a form of collateral, signing agreements that ensure the country's sovereignty remains intact while providing necessary financial backing. Meanwhile, the internal response from Burkina Faso's citizens is one of mixed but largely favorable reactions. People from all walks of life, from farmers to urban workers, begin to feel a shift in the political atmosphere. Local businesses thrive, and a sense of optimism spreads, particularly among younger generations who see in Traoré a leader who is genuinely addressing their concerns. Nonetheless, the country remains on edge, as rumors of further sanctions and foreign-led opposition continue to circulate. As the domestic situation stabilizes and the initial wave of reforms take root, Traoré uses the opportunity to address the nation once more. Standing in front of a crowd of jubilant citizens, he declares that his fight is not just against economic injustice but also against the insidious forces of foreign manipulation that have long kept African nations in a state of dependency. "We will stand tall, with or without the approval of those who seek to control our destiny," he announces. "Our future belongs to us." Traoré's resilience in the face of foreign pressure has inspired not only Burkinabe citizens but also leaders across the continent. In Mali, Niger, and Guinea, similar calls for economic independence grow louder, fueled by the belief that the time for Africa to stand free from the shadows of former colonial powers is now. The ripple effect of Traoré's policies is clear. Burkina Faso may be a small country in terms of landmass, but it is becoming a beacon of hope for those who dare to challenge the status quo. The response to Ibrahim Traoré's leadership reaches far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso. As his policies continue to reshape the country, the ripple effect begins to touch the rest of Africa. In neighboring Mali, citizens organize rallies to show solidarity with Burkina Faso's new direction. Niger sees a surge in calls to reject the CFA franc and demand fairer terms for their own resources, while in Guinea, activists share videos of Traoré's speeches, rallying behind his vision of a more self-reliant Africa. Across the continent, there is a growing recognition that Traoré's leadership represents a new model of governance. He is not a dictator, as some Western critics would label him, but a leader who listens to the people, values their contributions, and takes bold action to address systemic inequality. His policies are reshaping the discourse around sovereignty and self-determination, providing a blueprint for other African nations to follow. As a result, many African leaders begin to rethink their relationships with former colonial powers. The Organization of African Unity, OAU, begins discussing the possibility of creating a more cohesive economic and political bloc that would prioritize African unity over external influence. While the idea is still in its infancy, the momentum generated by Traoré's actions has sparked conversations that were once considered taboo. African leaders are starting to ask themselves, why should we continue to bend to foreign pressures when we have the resources and potential to chart our own course? International institutions, once quick to dismiss African leaders who challenge the status quo, are now forced to pay attention. The European Union's policy on African countries begins to shift, with some members expressing concern over the growing influence of non-Western powers in the Sahel. Meanwhile, China and Russia, who have long seen the potential in Africa's natural resources, step up their engagement, offering alternative trade routes and financial assistance that do not come with strings attached. In the midst of this changing geopolitical landscape, Traoré remains steadfast in his commitment to Africa's sovereignty. He recognizes that Burkina Faso is just one part of a much larger struggle, but his leadership has set the stage for a broader movement. He continues to push forward with his vision, knowing that the road ahead will be challenging but also full of opportunity. As he gazes out across the Sahelian horizon, he knows that Africa's destiny is in the hands of its people, and it is time for them to take their place on the global stage. As Burkina Faso's economy begins to stabilize and Traoré's political initiatives gain traction, the country experiences a strange and almost symbolic weather event. The rain that falls in the Sahel is often rare and brief, but this particular downpour is different. In early September, a sudden storm envelopes Ouagadougou, drenching the streets in just a few minutes before it passes. At first, it seems like just another seasonal anomaly, but something unusual happens in the wake of the rain. After the storm clears, residents step out of their homes to find a strange phenomenon: boot prints appear in the muddy streets, as though someone had walked through the water before it evaporated. These footprints lead to a nearby warehouse where, hours later, a team of local officials uncovers a hidden stash of weapons and smuggled goods. The discovery is significant. It is clear that the goods have been planted by foreign agents seeking to destabilize the country. The rain, which initially seemed like a mere meteorological event, is now seen by many as a sign of providence. Some Burkinabe citizens begin to believe that the land itself has revealed the plot to undermine their nation's progress. The mysterious footprints become a symbol of Traoré's growing influence and the national awakening that is taking place. News of the discovery spreads quickly, and soon the hashtag domestic interference trends on social media, with citizens sharing their thoughts on the need for Africa to protect its sovereignty. In a press conference, Traoré addresses the nation, acknowledging the symbolism of the rain and the discovery of the weapons. "This land speaks to us," he says. "It will no longer be silent in the face of external manipulation. We have a responsibility to protect our future, and today, we have taken another step in securing it." The incident becomes a rallying point for the people of Burkina Faso. It reinforces the idea that their struggle for sovereignty is not just a political battle but a spiritual one as well. It serves as a reminder that the land, the people, and their leaders are connected in a shared fight for dignity and self-determination. As the story of the rain spreads beyond Burkina Faso's borders, it catches the attention of neighboring countries. Mali, Niger, and other African nations begin to see the event as a powerful metaphor for their own struggles against external interference. The rain, in its brief but powerful appearance, has united the people of the Sahel in a new understanding of their shared destiny. By the end of 2023, Traoré's government has introduced the doctrine of dignity, a bold new initiative designed to secure Burkina Faso's economic independence and reinforce its political sovereignty. This doctrine outlines a set of policies that challenge not only the old colonial systems but also the modern-day structures of economic exploitation that continue to affect many African nations. Article 1, Territorial Integrity. Foreign military presence, including private contractors and international peacekeeping forces, will be phased out within the next year. This will ensure that Burkina Faso's sovereignty is respected and that foreign powers no longer have a direct influence on its military or security decisions. Article 2, Resource Sovereignty. The government will renegotiate existing mining contracts to ensure that the country retains a larger share of the profits from its vast natural resources, particularly gold, lithium, and other valuable minerals. Any company that fails to meet these new terms will face expropriation. Article 3, Civic Empowerment. Education will be the foundation of the country's long-term success. The government will invest heavily in infrastructure and educational programs that emphasize critical thinking, historical consciousness, and self-sufficiency. This includes a new curriculum that focuses on African history, colonialism, and the importance of maintaining national sovereignty. While these policies have sparked debate within the international community, they are met with widespread support within Burkina Faso. The doctrine of dignity gives citizens a sense of pride and purpose, as they begin to see themselves as active participants in their country's destiny rather than passive recipients of foreign aid. However, the implementation of this doctrine is not without challenges. The country's economy is still fragile, and foreign sanctions have been imposed by several Western powers. Yet, despite these obstacles, Traoré remains determined to push forward. He knows that the road to true independence will be long and difficult, but he is convinced that the sacrifices made today will create a stronger, more self-reliant Burkina Faso in the future. The doctrine of dignity becomes a rallying cry not only for the people of Burkina Faso but for other African nations that are similarly struggling against external pressures. It serves as a reminder that sovereignty is not a gift given by foreign powers but something that must be fought for and protected. As the sun sets over Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré stands at the front of a small gathering, his eyes focused on the horizon. The country has undergone significant changes over the past year, and while there is still much work to be done, he feels a sense of hope that has not existed in Burkina Faso for decades. The initiatives he has set in motion, the appreciation of unsung heroes program, the doctrine of dignity, and his relentless push for economic sovereignty, have begun to reshape the country's identity. The road ahead is not without its challenges. Foreign powers continue to apply pressure, hoping that Burkina Faso will relent and return to the status quo. But Traoré knows that the foundation for long-lasting change has already been laid. The people of Burkina Faso are no longer passive recipients of aid, they are active participants in their country's future. They are aware of their worth and are no longer willing to accept the narrative that they are poor or dependent. Traoré's journey, which began with a simple walk through Ouagadougou, has turned into a movement that transcends national borders. Across the Sahel, in Mali, Niger, and Guinea, his story has become a symbol of Africa's potential to break free from the chains of colonialism and neocolonialism. The rain that fell on Ouagadougou and the discovery of weapons planted by foreign agents were not just physical events, they were symbolic of the fight for Africa's dignity. Looking to the future, Traoré is determined to continue leading Burkina Faso along the path of sovereignty and self-determination. The road may be difficult, but he is confident that the people of Burkina Faso will stand with him, as they have done so many times before. In the end, he knows that true independence is not just about political or economic power, it is about reclaiming the dignity that has long been denied to so many.